Jameis Winston, we've seen him at his best. You have the potential to score with the Chiefs. I don't think you have that potential with Taysom Hill. You're going to be relying on your defense to shut down an offense that we haven't really seen be shut down yet. We saw them have a really bad game last week where they turned the ball over. They lost the turnover battle 4-1 and still won because the Dolphins couldn't quite score enough points. So they need to go to Winston because he has a higher upside as far as points scored is concerned.
Yeah, look, I mean, and Dan Graziano just did a good job of illustrating how critical these games are. They have already fallen behind Green Bay for the 1 seed, which means the only bye. Desmond Howard, same to you. Do you believe that Sean Payton should go to Jameis Winston this week to try and match Patrick Mahomes score for score?
I agree with Dominique. With Jameis Winston, when he's at his best, he can definitely get it done offensively and give them an opportunity to match score for score with Kansas City. But, I mean, he's so great. He can throw 5 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, keep both teams in the game at the same time. And that's the risk that you take with Jameis Winston. The one thing you don't want to do is give Kansas City extra possessions. If you do that, they will hurt you. So it seems as though Winston would be the guy to go to because you can open up the offense and maybe you can air it out some. But you have to make sure he doesn't turn the ball over because that can be detrimental and disastrous.
Right, and that has been his MO. So it's an interesting line that you're walking there. Do you want to play it safer with Taysom Hill, or do you want to go for the gusto, for lack of a better way of putting it, with Jameis Winston? D. Wood, what would you do?
I would go with Jameis Winston because I don't think you can game manage your way into beating the Kansas City Chiefs. That's what I look at. That's what I see when I look at Taysom Hill. I think he's a guy that's limited in the passing game. You can, use all his, tricks in his toolbox to, wildcat and all those type of things. But when you're going against Patrick Mahomes, ultimately you got to score points because you can't expect your defense, as good as it is, to hold the Kansas City Chiefs down. We know that Jameis Winston is this wild roller coaster. One week he'll give you 5 touchdowns, another week he might give you 5 interceptions. But he's going to give you opportunities in the passing game that Taysom Hill, quite honestly, just doesn't give you.
Now, Nick, if you think back to last year, when he was still in Tampa and throwing all those picks, I used to joke I was the last man dying on the Jameis Winston hill. What does it tell us that when this opportunity arose 4 games ago, Sean Payton does not seem to have even really given serious consideration to giving the ball to Jameis?
Yeah, I mean, it tells us if we trust Sean Payton's ability to evaluate quarterback, which I guess he's given us no reason to not trust it, that Jameis hasn't progressed. He hasn't gotten any better with taking care of the football. Because I think there are plenty of times in last week's game where you could have considered going to Jameis Winston. So maybe Sean Payton sees something that we don't see and he knows something we don't know, and that's why he won't give him a chance. And I understand that you put Jameis in, it increases the probability that you get blown all the way out, but also increases the chance that you are in the game. I think Taysom Hill keeps you in the middle. You're likely to lose by a little bit less, but you're not likely to get completely stomped, which could happen with Jameis.
I think you're exactly right. It's a funny way to put it, but I think it's actually right. You don't beat Kansas City 17-13. That's just not on the list of options that are going to happen here. So Go for it and try and beat him 37-36. I think it makes a lot of sense. We'll see if he winds up doing it. That's the story with a big-time team in the NFC. Let's look at the AFC playoff picture here, because the race for the final wild card spot is coming down to 3 teams. Again, it's 3 teams for 1 spot. Dolphins, Ravens, Raiders. You look at their remaining schedules, Baltimore and Vegas seem to have big advantage there. Miami not favored to win any of their remaining games. Tough ones against the Patriots and Bills are still on the list. So let's ask what I think is the most interesting question about those teams. And D. Wood, I will start with you. Of the teams that are going to wind up, of those 3 teams, which is the one you think the big teams in the AFC don't want to see coming? Who do they not want to see get in?
To me, it's Baltimore because of experience and Lamar Jackson. Baltimore's been in the playoffs. They've experienced this one game elimination type of deal. And when you have an explosive talent like Lamar Jackson, that scares anybody because this guy can go off at any given time. And we saw that on Monday night when he left the game and came back in, and literally the next play was a touchdown pass to Hollywood Brown. That's what he gives you. The ability to, make a defense look silly out there. So, of all those teams, it's got to be the Ravens for me.
Dan Graziano, how about you?
I think about the best team in the AFC is the Kansas City Chiefs. The only team that's beaten them this year is the Raiders, who came pretty close to beating them twice. Now, I think the Raiders are cooked. They'd be on a 4-game losing streak right now if not for Greg Williams. So I don't think they're getting in. But if they got in, and if they got to a game against the Kansas City Chiefs, it seems to me, based on experience this year, that that would be the team that would give the Chiefs the most concern.
That's a point well taken. Dominique, how about you? Which is the team amongst these you think the big boys in the AFC don't want to see coming?
Yeah, I think it's the Dolphins because of their secondary play, and which leads to them having really good defense that can keep them in just about any game. And Tua is still growing as a quarterback that may be able to have a breakout game here or there. I would agree with Damien that it was the Ravens if it wasn't for all their injuries in the secondary. Their defense has frankly been bad for a couple of weeks because they aren't healthy on the back end. The Dolphins defense is playing as well as anybody right now, making these type of one-handed interceptions against the best quarterback in the league. Xavier Howard and Byron Jones are playing really well, and the rest of the defense is playing well around them. So I think teams will be concerned about facing off against that defense, and maybe Tua can take it to the next level and score enough points to knock somebody off.
That's fair, but if I'm going to break a tie here, I'm going to break it with the Baltimore Ravens, and I will give you two reasons. One, I think coming in, and Marcus Spears described them yesterday as a dog fighting its way out of the corner, which is completely different from what they were last year. I think that is a role that suits them well historically. And the other is, if I'm picking one player who could just wreck a game and beat you by himself amongst those three teams, clearly Lamar Jackson is that player. So I'll go Ravens, and we'll see what happens.
After Patrick Mahomes' week last week, you have to give it to Aaron Rodgers. He's taking the lead. He's not without weapons like a lot of people like to say. They have good running backs, and their offensive line protects him quite well. And obviously, Devontae Adams is outstanding. But I do think that you take him off that team, and they are a very, very different team. And we already know what the Chiefs look like without Patrick Mahomes. They're still very good if you think back to when they had Moore playing last year or when they had Alex Smith starting at quarterback. It's a lot of talent on that team. I think Rodgers' value is higher.
D. Wood, Chiefs or the field to win the AFC? Who you got?
I'm going with the Kansas City Chiefs. Listen, last week against the Miami Dolphins, they were down 10-0 at the end of the first. The third quarter, they're up 30-10, and this is with the quarterback throwing 3 interceptions. This team can beat you in so many different ways. I'm going with the Kansas City Chiefs.
Next up, Dan Graziano, Saints or Packers to come out of the NFC? Who you got?
This week, I have to say the Packers, even though Dominique Foxworth is absolutely wrong with his MVP pick, and it should be Patrick Mahomes. Aaron Rodgers makes the Packers dangerous, but what makes them really dangerous is because the Saints lost to the Eagles, the Packers now have the 1 seed, which means they would get the first-round bye. They would only have to win 2 games to get to the Super Bowl, whereas the Saints would have to win 3. That makes a huge difference.
All right, I'm going to jump into the middle of that argument because we could do that debate a little bit later. But, you know, one loss begat a lot of questions in New Orleans, it felt like, this weekend. And Dominique, I want to come to you. If you were Sean Payton looking at a game this weekend against Kansas City,